During dinner, my daughter-in-law leaned across the table and said, "I hope you die soon." And my son? He looked down at his plate and said nothing. That's how it ended. But let me tell you how it began. My name is Helen. I'm 73, a widow for nearly 2 decades. I raised my son Daniel on my own after my husband passed, working 2 jobs, pinching pennies, and sacrificing sleep so he'd have the life I never had. I never asked for much in return. A call every Sunday. A birthday card maybe. A little room in his house where I could grow old surrounded by the family I built with my own hands. So when Daniel and his wife Rachel were house hunting in Boston, I made what I thought was the most natural decision for a mother. I bought them a home, spacious, filled with light, in a quiet neighborhood with good schools and friendly neighbors. The deed stayed in my name. My brother, ever the cautious attorney, insisted on that. "Just a formality," he said. "You're generous, Helen, but be smart too." I felt guilty keeping the legal power, but I listened. I always trusted Daniel would do right by me, and for a while, everything seemed fine. The first time I saw their faces light up with joy as I handed over the keys, I felt something bloom in my chest. I remember saying, "This is for you. Just give me a quiet corner and let me be close in my final years." It was supposed to be a gift, but it turned into a sentence. At first, the changes were so small they almost felt imagined. My favorite blanket disappeared. My photo of Robert, my late husband, was replaced with a generic painting of ocean waves. Rachel would brush off my questions with a sweet smile and say, "Oh, Helen, you probably just misplaced it." Then came the pills. My blood pressure medication suddenly looked different. Rachel, being a nurse, assured me she'd simply streamlined my regimen. "You're getting forgetful with names and dates," she said once, laughing softly. "This will help keep you on track." What followed was harder to explain. I'd miss calls that I never heard ring. My newspaper went missing from the porch. When I asked about the neighborhood book club I'd loved attending, Rachel would sigh, "Didn't I tell you it was canceled?" No, she hadn't, but trying to explain that made me feel foolish, even to myself. The worst part wasn't the missing things, or the changed medications, or the slowly shifting walls of my own reality. It was the whispers. One night I passed by the living room and heard Rachel on the phone. I froze in place as her voice floated into the hallway. "She's like a child, only worse," she said. "But honestly, the house is worth it." That moment cracked something inside me. I gave them everything, but I was becoming nothing in their eyes. If you've ever felt invisible or pushed aside by those you love, this story is for you. Stay with me, like, comment, and don't forget to subscribe to Real Her Stories. We tell the truths too many women keep buried. It didn't happen all at once. Like a leak in a roof you don't notice until the ceiling caves in. The changes started as tiny things, quiet things. Things I almost brushed off because I didn't want to seem paranoid or ungrateful. But then I began to see the pattern. My morning pills, especially the blood pressure ones, started to look different, slightly rounder, a yellow tint instead of white. When I asked Rachel, she smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, Helen, I've adjusted your meds. It's easier this way. You've been a little forgetful, remember?" Forgetful. That word began to follow me around the house like a shadow. A few days later, I found a framed photo of Robert and me from our honeymoon, one I kept on my nightstand, tucked away in a drawer in the hallway closet. When I asked Daniel about it, he looked up from his phone and shrugged. "Maybe you moved it, Mom." I hadn't. Then there was the newspaper, missing 3 days in a row. When I asked Rachel, she said with a laugh, "Oh, I didn't think you were reading those anymore." And the book club, the one I looked forward to each month. Suddenly, I was no longer getting the invitations. "I told you about the meeting," Rachel said when I asked why no one had shown up for the gathering. "You must have forgotten." Again that word, forgetful. It was a slow erosion of self, not overt, not violent, just subtle enough that I started to question myself. Until one morning when Evelyn came knocking. She lived 3 houses down and had always been warm but not overbearing. That day, she brought over tea and 2 cranberry scones. We sat on the back porch, the only place that still felt like mine. "You haven't been to the last 3 book club meetings," she said gently, "and you stopped returning my calls. Is everything all right, Helen?" I looked at her and opened my mouth to lie, to offer some polite excuse, but her eyes, kind, steady, familiar, invited the truth. "I don't know," I whispered, "but I think something's happening to me, around me, and I don't know if I'm imagining it." And so I told her. About the medication, the photographs, the missed calls, the way Rachel spoke to me, the way Daniel didn't speak at all, the quiet dismissal, the isolation, how I'd started to feel like I was unraveling, one forgotten moment at a time. Evelyn didn't look shocked. She looked angry. "Helen," she said carefully, "I was a social worker for 30 years. Before that, I practiced elder law. And everything you're describing, this isn't forgetfulness. This is gaslighting. This is control. This might even be elder abuse." That word hit me like cold water. Abuse. I recoiled at it. "Daniel would never," I said. "He's just overwhelmed. Rachel's the one who manages the house. She's a nurse. She knows what she's doing." "Exactly," Evelyn said. "She knows exactly what she's doing. That's the problem." She urged me to start documenting everything, the dates, the inconsistencies, the small humiliations. She even gave me a leather-bound journal and a tiny digital recorder. "Just in case," she said, slipping it into my palm like a lifeline. At first I felt foolish, but deep down I knew Evelyn was right. Something was happening, and I needed to protect myself. So I started writing. I wrote about the pills, how they changed shape and color, how they made me dizzy. I wrote about how Rachel would tell guests I was confused, how she once laughed about me trying to make oatmeal with dishwasher soap. It never happened. I recorded snippets of conversations, Rachel telling Daniel I was getting worse, that it was time to consider options. And then, one afternoon, while Rachel was out and Daniel was at work, I went into their home office. I didn't expect to find anything. Honestly, I think I wanted to prove to myself that I was imagining things, that I was wrong. Instead, in a drawer under a stack of old magazines, I found a manila folder labeled Future Planning. Inside were property assessments, renovation sketches, brochures for memory care facilities, and worse, partially filled out forms for mental health evaluations. In them were fabricated stories. Helen confused about the year. Helen forgot her son's name. Helen tried to leave the stove on overnight. None of it was true, but someone, they, had written it down and planned to use it as evidence. My hands trembled as I took photos of everything with the tiny camera Evelyn had given me. I put everything back exactly as I found it. That night I stared at the ceiling and couldn't sleep, not out of fear, out of clarity, because now I understood something I'd been too afraid to say aloud. It was no longer just about keeping my dignity, it might have been about saving my life. The moment I truly knew I had to leave wasn't when Rachel changed my medication or when Daniel defended her over me for the 100th time. It was when I heard her say it out loud. "We'll increase her dosage," she said casually, her voice drifting down the hallway one late evening as she spoke to someone over the phone. "Like we did with your father. It won't take long." "Like we did with your father." I stood frozen outside the door, heart pounding in my chest so hard I could barely breathe. My Robert had passed away too quickly, too quietly, under Rachel's watchful care while she played the role of doting daughter-in-law. At the time, I chalked it up to life's cruelty, but now her words hit me like ice water running down my spine. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the ceiling in the dark and listened for creaking footsteps. I knew it wasn't paranoia anymore. It was survival. By morning, I called Evelyn. "I need to go," I told her. My voice was steady in a way it hadn't been in weeks. "It's time." She didn't hesitate. "Pack only what matters, leave the rest." While Rachel worked her hospital shift and Daniel holed up in his office, I packed one small suitcase, my documents, my journal, the photos of Robert I'd hidden under my mattress, and the bottle of pills I'd refused to take. I left my bedroom exactly as it was, untouched, except for a note left on the neatly made bed. "You wished for my death. To you, I am now gone." I slipped out the back door just after sunrise. Evelyn waited around the corner in her car, engine running. I didn't look back. That afternoon, with legal documents in hand proving I still held the deed, we filed an official eviction notice through her former law firm. The next day, the papers were hand-delivered to Daniel and Rachel in an elegant navy envelope. Thanks to the discreet security camera Evelyn's son had installed weeks earlier, we saw everything. Rachel tore the envelope open, expecting an invitation. Her smirk vanished the moment she read the words. "James!" she shrieked, stumbling backward as if the paper had struck her physically. "She's not dead! This is her revenge!" Daniel, pale and stunned, read the notice 3 times before slumping into the armchair, like a man who'd just realized the roof over his head wasn't his after all. I listed the house for sale that same week. The proceeds would go towards something I never thought I'd have again, a life of my own. I found a small seaside cottage in Rockport, Massachusetts. Nothing fancy, just quiet, with a garden I could tend to, and a view of the water Robert would have loved. While I began rebuilding, Evelyn began investigating. She reported Rachel to the state nursing board for medication tampering and unethical conduct, submitting both my documentation and our collected recordings. Soon after, we received confirmation. Rachel had been placed on administrative leave pending a formal inquiry, but it didn't stop there. Evelyn's quiet reach extended further than I ever expected. A friend of hers still working in hospital administration managed to retrieve records from Robert's final days. There were inconsistencies. Medication logs altered, doses administered without authorization. A nurse had once filed a complaint, Sarah Jenkins, but had been transferred after being accused of incompetence by Rachel. Everything made sickening sense. Word began to spread in their social circles. The respectable nurse with the sweet smile and polished manners wasn't what she seemed. Neither was the silent husband who stood by her side. Invitations dried up. Friends stopped answering their calls. Daniel tried to contain it, but the unraveling was inevitable. While cleaning out the attic, he stumbled upon something he never expected: a storage box tucked behind insulation marked with my name. Inside were items Rachel had told him were lost in a leak: my wedding album, Robert's letters, my father's watch, even a necklace Daniel gave me when he was 10. All of it, hidden. That night he sent me a letter. Not a text, not a voicemail, a letter in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know I finally understand what I did. There's a key enclosed to the storage unit. Everything Rachel hid is in there. I saved what I could. I'm sorry, Mom. I sat with that letter for hours. I held the key in my hand like a weight, not heavy in size, but in meaning. And I didn't reply, not right away, because healing doesn't come on someone else's timeline. It comes on your own. Mine had just begun. The storage unit was cold and dim, but the moment I stepped inside, it felt like stepping into a museum of the life I thought I'd lost. I opened box after box carefully, as if each one might break me, and maybe it did, a little. My wedding album, Robert's jazz records, still alphabetized. His corduroy jacket with a faint scent of cedar. Letters we wrote to each other in the early years, silly and tender, folded neatly and tied with a ribbon. These weren't just objects. They were pieces of me. And somehow, Daniel had saved them. I brought them back to my cottage in Rockport and placed them gently around the house. The reading chair Robert loved, his sanctuary, now sits by my window, facing the sea. I didn't expect it to fit so perfectly in the corner, or to fit so perfectly into this new life. That night, I sat in the chair with one of Robert's records playing softly in the background. The tears came, not from grief, but from release. For the first time in years, I wasn't mourning what I'd lost. I was honoring what I'd reclaimed. My days now begin with tea on the porch, the sea breeze tugging at my robe. I plant flowers in the garden out front and take walks with my neighbor Joan, who's a retired librarian with a love of mysteries and strong coffee. I'm not lonely. I'm independent. And there's a difference I now understand deeply. One cold December morning, I received a letter from Daniel. This time, no apologies, just an invitation. I'll be at Harbor View Cafe in Gloucester next Saturday. No expectations. I'd just like to see you, even for 5 minutes. I went. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We talked. About books. About Robert. About what healing might look like. Not for the past, but maybe for whatever future we still shared, even if only in small pieces. I no longer measure love by words spoken, but by the space people make for you in their lives. And now, I've made space for myself. Thank you for listening to Helen's story. If it touched something in you, please share this video with someone who needs it. Subscribe, comment, and tell us where you're watching from, because here on Real Her Stories, every voice matters.